Without any further ado, I'll introduce William Caelli, who's from International Information, speaking on Cryptowars Redo. So
Redux.
William was last night's winner of the AusCERT Award for Individual Excellence in Cybersecurity. Without any further ado, if you'd like to give William an applause.
Yeah. Thanks very much. Great to be here, and honestly, a bit overwhelmed by last night. Death by PowerPoint coming up. After 43 years of working in crypto and cybersecurity, I changed my title because of the front page of the Kennedy School Review. You're all here on for our opening talk by Chris about the crypto wars, and indeed that comes from the Kennedy School. The return of the crypto wars. Sounds like something definitely out of Star Wars. I want to talk very quickly and move ahead quite fast to give you a feeling of these years and really, to me, a return to where we were almost literally some 40 years ago. Okay, let's move ahead. Just very quickly. I think I do that, do I? Yes, here we go. I'll do make some tributes. Then, of course, do a bit of timelining. Talk about the dimensions of the problem we've got today and tomorrow, and then really come to some conclusions very quickly. Oh, by the way, you may wonder what that machine is there. That's actually a, I'm not sure we got any RAF people here? RAF people, quiz for you. It's actually a Type X Mark III. It's a manual Type X Mark III that my wife's uncle, Wally, who was a SIGINT and signals officer in World War II, and that's the machine that the New Zealand Air Force carried around the Pacific Islands. You see, it doesn't need any power. It just needs a man handle. You just had to turn the thing. It was encrypting and could encrypt and decrypt at the rate of about 1 character per second. So just churn faster, and you could do it faster. Well, anyone from our visitors from overseas here, please, do remember Queensland and Brisbane, of course, was the heart of crypto during World War II. This, of course, is a mock-up of Sig Sally at the NSA of the Cryptologic Museum. It's just outside Fort Meade in Maryland. And of course, that's actually not the real Sig Sally mock-up, but that's a mock-up of it, which of course was one of the world's first encrypted voice facility. And this, of course, was used by MacArthur and the group including Churchill, Roosevelt, etc., during World War II. And of course, one of these was installed here in Brisbane, and if you want to have a look with background of that, do visit the MacArthur Museum, which is just off Queen Street in Brisbane. It's open, I think, Wednesday, Thursday, Fridays, and it's well worthwhile going in. And most recently, we were most honoured, about 15 years ago, we were most honoured to be able to recognise the over 300 women who worked in MacArthur's decryption facility called the Central Bureau here in Brisbane. And here are some of the girls there 15 years ago. And indeed, they worked at Henry C. Ascot, where indeed one of the first IBM tabulators was used in relationship to decrypting the Kahn codes. Okay, that's quite important. So that's just a bit of background for us. I'd also like to pay tribute to my nostalgic, few of my old friends. Dr. Harold Hyland, a very old friend of mine. Harold was a cipher officer with the US Navy, and he worked on that, which is, of course, the purple analog, which is the machine that was built. This is not a purple machine from Japan. This is actually an analog of it that was made for decrypting the purple intercepts. Why is that rather important? It led to the entry of the United States into World War II. So that's rather an important box. That's the analog box that was used to decrypt the messages between the various embassies of then Japan. Well, let's move ahead. Yes, you've had your nostalgia, but let's get even more nostalgic. I'd like to talk about some timelines. I'm going to make it over essentially lots of 20 years. You'll see quite a few here. I'm going to start back in the 60s with another person who I was very pleased to be able to talk with, David Kahn, who really started the whole, in my opinion, started the whole of the crypto wars a long time ago, all the way through to today. So let's have a quick look. Let's move ahead fast. David Kahn wrote the first major book, published book on code breaking, and is attributed at the time to gaining attention into the whole crypto world with his book, The Code Breakers. And to use David's actual terms, NSA was not happy. Not happy, Jan, definitely at the time. Indeed, they monstered the publisher to try and revamp parts of it. He submitted it to NSA. It came back again. It was redone a couple of times, and finally it was published. As you know, David did his PhD at Cambridge University in history, and it came again through an English publisher. But because of the days of Yakuza or the Five Eyes, in actual fact there was pressure exerted even in the UK at the time. So that's interesting. Indeed, we talk about crypto wars, but in my opinion, I'll call this the first crypto skirmish, shall we? Mid-1960s. We'll go a bit further than that too. At the same time, the data encryption standard, 1973, NBS NIST announces a call for ciphers for essentially unclassified but sensitive government and allied business cryptography. It became known as the data encryption standard. The first call for ciphers came out in late 1973, and that's when yours truly got dragged into this by a company called Control Data Corporation when I was working in Minneapolis, Minnesota. And yes, it is cold in Minneapolis in midwinter. You know, minus 50 Fahrenheit, you know it's cold. But I like cold, that's all right. So essentially what happened there, as you know, internationalization of that is rather interesting. There was an attempt at the time to internationalize the data encryption standard. We didn't call it the standard, they used to call it the DEA, the data encryption algorithm. But indeed, having sat in some of the meetings with the ISO at the time, we sat in some meetings in France and also in Europe, there was a strong resistance by United States representatives not to move the DEA into an international standard, and I don't think it even is today. Interesting enough, for those involved, we Australians, we did standardise it. It became Australian Standard 2805.5. So we did actually standardise that, but it was never made into an international standard. A bit further on, let's have a quick look. The rise of public key crypto is the same period of time, and indeed, quite interestingly enough, we saw Diffie and Hellman, although I'm very pleased that GCHQ have declassified and opened up all the documentation of the invention of public key systems at GCHQ in the UK before the open work of with Diffie and Marty Hellman. So that actually predates that by a couple of years in the UK. So good on you, the UK, but unfortunately never got. I'm very pleased that the IEEE has now recognised the work and cooked by the group at GCHQ. That's now been officially recognised. Interesting enough, the term first crypto war is not my term. That's actually a term used in a very, very recent press release from nothing less than Stanford University, where they basically said, this is from the actual Stanford University press release of a time that Whit Diffie and Marty Hellman, as you must know, received the 2015 Turing Award for the open work on public key cryptography. What's fascinating about was Stanford has said, hey, this was the first crypto war, because in actual fact, letters to the publisher at the time by NSA to the publisher suggested that the authors, that's Marty and Whit, could be subject to prison time for the thinking and for the publication of the work. Indeed, that would be subject to that because of the export of cryptography as a military weapon. So it's interesting at times, one of the first clashes. Now, I shall let Stanford have the first crypto war, even though I think it was going on before that, much more before that, particularly in the UK and in the USA. Same time, just a bit of background on crypto involvement. You might recognise, anyone who's old might recognise that. That's IMP number 1. That's the first interface message processor for the then called ARPANET, then DARPANET, then eventually, as you remember, Al Gore developed the internet. Oh no, I'm sorry, it was Malcolm Turnbull, wasn't it? It was the internet, yes, Malcolm Turnbull invented the internet in Australia. May I quote a certain Prime Minister, or past Prime Minister? This, of course, is interface message processor number 1. If you get to Mountain View, please go to the Computer History Museum because you'll see it there. Those who are familiar with the Internet RFCs might recognize RFC 795, which is the DISA, Defense Innovation Security Agency in the United States, their service mappings. You might remember that ARPA and DARPA were very much, ARPANET were very much there for essentially defence-funded research projects at open universities. And indeed, under the RFC, for example, they had to allow for flash override and related military messages. And indeed, now we can talk about, but in actual fact, crypto modules, under the help of Ruth Davis, were incorporated, could be incorporated into the Honeywell 516, which is this box here, which was used to interface your host system to the then early ARPANET and DARPANET. So we have early examples of crypto services. Indeed, I must admit, you as an end user wouldn't see the crypto. It was essentially on what we'd call a link-to-link encryption base. Interesting, a very old colleague and friend of mine who recently left us, Dr. Willis Ware of Rand Corporation, 1967, was asked by the US Army and by DOD to work on security in this new world of computer systems. And indeed, just recently, I'm very, very pleased to see that the actual original reports of Willis have been declassified and are now available through the George Washington University Archive of Security and National Security Documents, which you can get through the George Washington Archive. And security controls for computer systems, which became Rand Report 609, in actual fact was a cut-down, sanitized version of that original report, but the original report is now available. What's important, talking to Willis over many margaritas in California, what important about was, even in that day, in the late 60s to early 70s, crypto as a mechanism for computer security was off the agenda. It was not on his agenda. And if you read the report, Willis's reports, you'll find cryptography does not enter anywhere. Just do a word scan and you will find that the word cryptography or encryption or decryption is not in any of those reports at all. It was regarded as being a completely separate entity and was used completely differently. Okay, well, let's move ahead. Let's look at 1980 to the year 2000. Well, lots of things have happened, right? PGP, we'll call that, shall we call that crypto war number 2? Indeed, SSL, we've heard about the SSL, problems there, and I think Tim can talk about that. Open source crypto, etc. Interesting times as we move from 1980 to the 2000s. The IETF and the Internet, the RFCs, I've said 795 already. Today, of course, we have DNSSEC and DANE, which came through in about the 1996 timeframe. Very, very interesting. You can help me, anybody here in the audience, ladies and gentlemen. I'm finding, putting on my hat as the chair of the Australian Domain Name Authority's Security and Stability Advisory Committee, you must likely know we signed the .au CCTLD in April last year. Actually, we've just updated the zone keys just a month ago. So what I'm finding, of course, is this is almost literally utterly unknown here in Australia. You're all putting in DNSSEC? You're signing your domain? No? No, didn't think so. Anyone signing their domains? Is that one? Oh, look, some. Great, microscopic number of signing their domains. .gov.au is signed, .gov.au is signed, edu.au is signed, think.com.au is also signed now too. But you'll have to have fun, but you should be thinking about that. And for policymakers, there's nothing more important. Phishing, okay? Immediately with DNSSEC, I can validate that where it came from is really where it should have come from on my screen. DNSSEC provides that validation. But again, it takes some money. Okay, rapid growth of cryptology in research and education starts to come up. 1988 at QIT, we formed the Information Security Research Centre, became then the ISI, and now, unfortunately, as I'll talk about in a minute, has been disbanded. Okay, one interesting one, of course, key escrow. No talk would be fun without key escrow. I mean, it's just, you have to really talk about that for, fun and games. essentially, electronics MYK60. Anyone got one? There are collectors of them now, by the way, on eBay, or if you've got a Crypto chip, you've got some money in your hands at the present moment. They're very much a Crypto chip. As also is the AT&T 3600E telephone, which is up there on the right. That's the voice system that used the Crypto chip. And they made about 10,000 of those, but most of them have stayed in their boxes. Anyway, so if you have one, remember, eBay or Gumtree or whatever, you might have something valuable. What's less talked about during the great key escrow debate, and I won't go into the detail of that, but you may have heard about the key escrow debate. Matter of fact, Hillary Clinton should know all about it. Eligible doorbell is something that was not talked about at all. This was an attempt to provide link-level encryption for law enforcement and intelligence agencies into routers and switches by means of essentially a proprietary protocol and a link-level encryption system to enable monitoring of target routers. Not much talked about, but it was a proposal. It also practically got nowhere too. Okay, so cryptography moves ahead. Elliptic curve cryptography happens. The crypto business starts to emerge, not the least of which my company will talk about in a minute, Eracom here on the Gold Coast. And crypto chips, co-processors start to materialize in the marketplace. And we'll see why in a minute. By the mid-90s, of course, what was called the COCOM arrangement had become what's called the Wassenaar arrangement, under which we currently operate as a member nation of the Wassenaar arrangement. That's for export of dual-use and military equipment and systems. Okay, so a lot of crypto chips came in, and finally, Australia, in the 90s, we produced a thing called the Walsh Report. This is the Walsh Report. Most famous example of how nerds and wonks can get things totally mixed up together. This is the Walsh Report. Gerard Walsh was the former head of ASIO, and he produced this report talking about crypto policy. Okay. What's interesting about that was an example. He actually said in that report, which you can get, by the way, it's on the Electronic Frontier Foundation Australia website, you can get the actual branch. He actually said, look, mandatory key recovery really is not to be recommended. And more important, he sort of thought that export restrictions on cryptography would be rather pointless as the internet started to develop. I think he was ahead of his time, shall we say. Okay, well, let's move ahead and see what actually has happened. Okay, well, we might remember, by the way, for the natural fact, the original DES standard, the actual encryption standards, never ever saw encryption in what they call general purpose computer systems developed under general purpose software systems. It was not approved and was not to be standardized. So that was changed with FIPS 46-2. They changed their mind and did allow for software implementation. And the reason for that was very, very simple. Having talked to the guys at NBS at the time when I was there, the reason for that was because a very simple phenomenon. In a general purpose computer, you could not guarantee the pathways for the key transfers. So key transfers could not be guaranteed. The keys could be exposed. And there's even a little funny way of doing that inside Unix by actually doing what's called a process status bit. You can actually transfer the keys without appearing to transfer the keys, just by switching on and off a project status. So that was a problem for time, and indeed, for those who are interested, that led us here to build a PC encryptor. And here's show and tell time, and here it is. This is number one. This is the world's first IBM PC encryptor. You notice it's got the old 8-bit bus on it, not that modern 16-bit stuff. This is the original IBM PC encryptor, built here, by the way, on the Gold Coast about 1983, this particular one. And we sold about 10,000 of those, mainly in Europe and elsewhere. So that's you may notice, of course, it's using a hardware DES cipher processor, the AMZ 8068, which is just in there at the present moment. So that's the actual example of Australian technology, and I pay tribute to my team there, particularly Dr. Ian Graham and a few others who worked on that particular thing. We also built a number of other machines there. As you can see, the first IBM Cello Connected encryption modules were built here, also on the Gold Coast. We hooked us up to IBM mainframes. They were also built here. So let's move ahead very quickly. So what's happened? 2020, decryption capability is being asked for defense purposes. You okay? The problem we're facing is access to metadata. The export restrictions in Australia are starting to move ahead. We're now, as you saw, part of the Wassenaar arrangement and enhanced dimensions with more people involved. We also have bilateral and multilateral arrangements existing at the present moment. So, life is moving quite fast. Well, here we go again. We have to have trust in the internet globally. Crypto weapons and nation states, socio-political and criminals, can form a basis for discussion. The development of crypto weapons, as we'll talk about later on, you most likely know in the United States, the Centers for Academic Excellence have been formed, and one group of those is called Centers for Academic Excellence in Cyber Operations. And there are 6 designated universities now who are in that particular area. So, open source cryptography enthusiasts is there now. For those, remember I showed you our ERICOM security modules? Well, right now, we're shrinking it down to one of them, which is a Raspberry Pi Mark B. And you most likely know there's some open source cipher algorithms, including EC squared, by the way, which is on that particular little chip itself, which the kids at school can tell you all about. So, the MOOCs are now offering open crypto education and training. Okay, so crypto wars are going to get far more interesting. I did a quick count. One of the best cryptography courses that cost you absolutely nothing is from Coursera. It's offered by Stanford University. It's a very advanced course. You can do elliptic curve cryptography, you can do RSA, you can do key management schemes, and all that stuff, and it will cost you the grand total sum of nothing. If you want to pay for some qualifications and certification, you can go to Udacity or Udemy, and you can pay for some money. In Udacity, you can get some qualifications from an approved United States or European university. So what's the problem? The problem is nerds versus policy wogs versus defense interests is the main problem we're facing. Okay, let's move ahead. Just recently, you may have noticed, people thought, well, key escrow had gone. In actual fact, it really hadn't gone. It just went a couple of years ago, quite literally. So, 2020, where are we headed? Well, I'd have to say, definitely international widespread competence in algorithms, implementation, integration is going to become the norm in the early 2022s. Everyone codes. Remember, kids have got their Raspberry Pis now at home in primary school. And as you most likely know, in the UK, the youngest MCSE, Microsoft Certified Software Engineer, and she is aged 7 years old. Crypto weapons in cyberspace are now well accepted and known. No one bothers to try and say, we don't do that. Well, they do, and they have for a long period of time. It's now fairly open versus there. The problem we're facing, oh, and by the way, enter China, India, and South America in that particular area. The problem we're facing, which is in my new book, over there, our new book from University of Auckland, Cyber Conflicts in Small States. The problem in the crypto war sense is that as an ICT colony, or what the anthropologists call a technology colony, which is what Australia is, and New Zealand, we don't make any of this stuff. We use it, we don't make it. That's called colonisation. So basically we have a problem in our hands of how to confront that. Quantum crypto, and we'll talk about it in a minute. I'm not sure whether you've all signed up to the IBM qubit machine, which is now available online for experimental work. You can now try your hand at some quantum computing at the Thomas J. Watson Centre. It just announced about IBM people here about 2 weeks ago. You can now sign up to work your own algorithms on qubit machines. This is going to have a massive impact on policy. Well, let's have a quick look a bit further at the dimensions of it. I'd like to go further than the traditional words of crypto wars. I believe we now have every possible permutation of the actors, and from a policy viewpoint, we're going to have to address it far more than just the FBI versus Apple. We've heard this morning alone what ransomware means. So sit there with a diagram and see. You'd have attack against a user. Well, we're going to call that ransomware. Crypto being used. Attack versus the vendor. Crypto being used quite deliberately to disrupt, for example, device drivers. Absolutely. In defense, we have exactly the same problem. So we have a myriad of permutations and combinations, as you can see there, across the board. And basically, we're going to have to face the fact that the dimension, that's why I call it Redux, the crypto wars have only started, but they're far more than just attack and defend. Although I must admit, we have a problem, as Mark Andreessen has just put it, we have a problem on our hands, I think, particularly in the United States. Mark Andreessen, who's a prominent venture capitalist in the Valley, has basically said just 2 days ago, there's a real problem now. The FBI, quote, the engineers in the Valley are becoming radicalized because they believe the FBI and powers that be, the US government, want to outlaw encryption. And as such, the backlash has really started. And that's Mark Andreessen in an interview just on Tuesday in the United States. So we have a problem in our hands of what I call the nerds versus the wonks versus the defense people. Okay, so let's move ahead, finish off for today and tomorrow. Obama put it quite well. Not new to accept some curbs on privacy in exchange for personal security. So he's swinging a bit either way. Indeed, this particular one here shows the problem that we're going to see. The House Judiciary Committee has now formed in the United States, and basically the idea there is we're going to try and see whether we can do something about cryptography at a policy level by forming a joint party group, which is a very US thing to do. GCHQ in the UK. Okay, we have to get together with the technology people who actually do this stuff because we're all dependent upon them. They dominate the industry, so therefore we're going to have to talk to them. So that's Robert Hannigan at GCHQ. At the same time, his Prime Minister is saying this. Here we go. Well, no, we are going to do something about this, and we should legislate accordingly, in essence, to sort of restrict and outlaw encryption. Well, we can see the dimension of the political problem we've got. The NATO CCD COE in Tallinn has said, look, now this is from NATO, the NATO CCD, saying, well, hold on, we don't recommend any form of backdoors, particularly if we're going to try and make secure systems. So you see what's happening, colleagues, in the policy versus technology fight. The crypto wars are back, and they're unfortunately back at a time of great unease. Well, we know it happened. You saw that the other day. Oh, Turnbull's still using Wicker, or maybe he's changed over to WhatsApp. Okay, all of a sudden, we've got 1 billion people doing crypto on an end-to-end basis. It's like the Uber of the crypto world. So, where do we move? What do we do? Well, let's have a quick look. In a political sense, we have completely opposing, diametrically opposed statements from members of the United States Congress. On the one side, important activists, political dissidents to do it. And indeed, as we know, the US government financed the Signal protocol, which WhatsApp depends on. But at the same time, Republicans from Arkansas, open invitation to terrorists and drug dealers. That represents the problem, colleagues, that we have. We really have. So let's move ahead. What do? Well, we've got a problem in our hands. We really do, as we enter the new phase of crypto wars. In Australia, you know, as of the 2nd of April this year, the offence provisions of the Export Controls Act came into force, and a permit will be required. Please note the words there, for the intangible supply of encryption or dual-use materials. That's going to be rather interesting. Please note this is very different to what occurs in the United States, where there's a specific exemption for academic research and what have you. There's not in our legislation or in our appropriate documents. indeed, this is the, you can't read this, but this is one of the documents that DTCA have put out to advise academics. This one gets the Bill Caelli Prize for gobbledygook. Essentially, you are allowed to present your research in deep cryptography at a crypto conference, but don't take your PowerPoint 4s with you. Okay, so you memorize them, okay, Mr. Memory. You get overseas and you sit down and you retype them in again when you're overseas. This is the sort of problem we're facing with nerds versus wonks versus policy people. You know, we have to get together and try and do something about this. These sort of advices are just downright silly. Okay, and I'll prove it. Here's an example. This is the forthcoming Asia Crypt conference, which will be held in Vietnam this year. Have a look at some of those topics. I would tend to call them absolutely spot on for DTCA. Foundations of crypto, provably secure, cryptanalysis, high-speed cryptography, being presented, and of course, interestingly enough, being presented by other members of the Wassenaar arrangement. Okay. Interestingly, in China, life's moving ahead even faster. The Office of the Cyberspace Administration, the Office of the Central Leading Group, said basically we're going to actually try and force you to do something about decryption under order. So we have an interesting problem. Okay, let's move ahead. So essentially, we're starting to see, as I mentioned earlier on, more permutations. We have to look at the problem of crypto war from the point of view of ransomware. We have to look at it from the point of view of the sort of academics and the researchers versus the policymakers, and we have to look at it from the point of view of defense and attack. So, problem of education, colleagues. Just recently, a United States study, big study by Cloud Passage, found that in the United States, practically no universities at all in the top 10 teach any form of cybersecurity at all, make it an important part of their undergraduate degree. It's just not there. Australian TAFE, so I got an F in America, talking to Craig Valley in Western Australia, I think we got a G. None of the top 10 do anything. In the top 50, only 3 universities in the United States are now teaching cybersecurity as a base requirement for a baccalaureate degree. But let's move ahead. What's happening elsewhere? This is the new Shenzhen University Research Institute of Network and Information Security. I'd like to thank my colleagues for doing some translation for me. My Mandarin isn't that good. But in actual fact, this is, of course, Deng Xiaoping and Xing Xiaomen have both sponsored this major research facility at Shenzhen. Have a look at those terms there. Lattice cryptography, elliptic curve, new algorithms, quantum computing and cryptography. I would tend to say that they would immediately fall under DTCA. Well, what's happening, colleagues, for Australia? Already there's a backlash in the United States. Congressman Langevin of Rhode Island has basically said, oh dear, the wording of the Wassenaar arrangement was so bad, it's going to really affect us, particularly for such things as penetration testing software and other things like that, which have been accidentally, inadvertently caught up in the Wassenaar arrangement. And of course, he's saying we have to start rethinking. And here we are here. What's happening? Well, meanwhile, not to be outdone, I'm sure you've heard about Caelli, which is the new Chinese operating system. This is sort of a Windows XP thing. It's not the, thank you to Vicky for doing this for me. It's not available in English. I've had to get these translated for you. But we'll have a quick look at what's incorporated into that. Securing stored data, encryption, information security, and protection expert is an access control system. So we're starting to see things move. Okay. Well, I'll finish off. The recent debate then is tension around law enforcement. I'm going further. It's going much further than that as criminals enter into it. What's our major problem? Conclusion. The problem, nerds, wonks, and protectors. How do they all meet together to meet the needs of our nations? We need more work on the socio-political psychology of the whole problem. And as such, I'll leave you with my 7 open questions. In other words, can we ban or restrict or influence crypto and associated industry today, effectively or economically? Can we say that Open SSL is to be banned for usage in this country or something? National governments constrain integration into systems. Well, already there's been a backlash, as you must hopefully know, about Dane. The Dane RFC has caused some problems, particularly in China. Backdoors are possible or even feasible. These are the questions we have to answer as professionals. Can we limit government cryptographic research and activity? What's happening? Can we limit or govern cryptologic and cybersecurity research and education, particularly at the academic level? In some ways, I say at this conference, DTCA, maybe it's an inadvertent, but it does give that impression, but they're definitely trying to do that. Everyone codes, yes. Ask your 7-year-olds for their Raspberry Pis. They're all coding in Scratch or something else. ICT colonies have a problem. That's us in a very, very simple way. How can we assess and maintain our imports and exports? Finishing off. Well, I think we can do it. I'd like to pay tribute to my former friend and colleague, Professor Dennis Longley. We were able to achieve a very unusual thing. The first non-US citizens to get the award from the NSA for this particular paper on what was called key vectors, the relationship of way in which cryptography keys could be managed using what's called key vectoring techniques. And that won the Best Prize Award in Baltimore in 1997. So 20 years ago, we were trying to bridge the gap between policy and technology. All right, finishing off. I think the future, quantum crypto, is both a dual use. Already IBM is saying it's not just cryptanalysis. If you look at the quantum site for IBM, they're saying this may be the tool for protecting the internet itself by using quantum cryptography, not just cryptanalysis. And that's a major statement from IBM. That's not me, that's IBM just literally this week. The ultimate dual-use technology may actually be cryptography. And with that, I'd like to leave my final statement, of course, to Bugs Bunny, who you must hopefully know when talking to Elmer Fudd. After all this, you know, this means war. Thank you very much.
So we've got time for one question. People will say 9/11 changed the world.
Yeah.
Crypto rights balance is different now. What do you think? People say 9/11 changed the world. Crypto rights balance is different now. What do you think?
Crypto rights.
Bill, that's me.
Yeah.
The idea is that the threats are worse now than they were pre.
9/11, yeah.
The argument is yes, privacy, security, balance. We've always had the balance. The balance was resolved previously.
Yeah.
Now the balance needs to be revisited.
Oh, absolutely.
Do you think that's right?
Yeah, the question is, other people, is the balance before, the world's changed, radically changed since 2001, okay, 9/11. The balance between protection, detection, radical change. Where should we stand? How do we stand today? Well, there's simply no doubt. I'd like to go back to, quite specifically, the fact that the internet, national information infrastructures and global information infrastructures now critically depend upon cryptography. We're not going to go away from that. So the answer basically is the balance now, in my opinion, has to move towards safety and security of our national information infrastructure. That must somehow come first. How we get that into our politicians, at the same time, we're getting the dark side coming in hot and strong as they form themselves into quite literally operational entities, as we heard in the previous talks earlier on today. So there is the balance. There is a balance. Most importantly, to answer the main question, has to be education. The problem what I see basically is that in many cases, when you talk to the policy wonks, as they call them in Washington, the level of education and knowledge, understanding, remember Turnbull did the internet in Australia. The problem is, at that level, the understanding is very low. I think the solution has to be education, and I think right at the present moment we have no choice, but we have to come down on the side of a much stronger, far more secure, non-weakened internet. Thanks a lot.
Thanks so much, William.